I have yet to experience the American dream. I have yet to feel free. I am tired of waiting. I am tired of living in the shadows of hate and ignorance. I am tired of people deciding and having the power over my future.
No papers, no fear. The immigrants are marching here. No papers, no fear.
And let me put this clear. My parents are not criminals, and neither am I. What affects undocumented youth in one state affects all undocumented youth.
If you're watching this, we have all been arrested.
The world is my expense. The cost of my desire. Jesus blessed me with his future, and I'm protected with fire. So raise your fists and march around. Just don't take what you need. I'm telling Barry those.
Which side are you on? There is no neutral ground. Will you speak out with me or silently join our oppressors?
Deep inside your children, I'm gonna swear you in my name. Hey, hey, we'll sleep now in the fire. Hey, hey, sleep now in the fire. It's my expense, the scope of my desire. The party blessed me with its future. I'm protected with fire. I am the leader, the Peter, the Santa Maria, the Luce, the rapist, the fields overseer, the agents, love orange, the priest of Hiroshima, the cost of my desire. Sleep now in the fire. Hey, hey. Sleep now in the fire! Hey, hey! Sleep now in the fire!
All over the country, we need to get out of a little bubble, be able to become unafraid to the full extension.
It's about a global issue and it impacts everyone. Through this action, I hope that encourage Asian American communities as well as immigrant community at large.
In California, there are over 500,000 undocumented youth. It is the time, and this is our chance, to stand against anti-immigrant policies like 287G and secure communities, or any other legislation that criminalizes and demoralizes and dehumanizes our communities.
And together we must stand. Doesn't matter how far a distance we are, we must stand together as a community. If we're all undocumented, then we're all the same.
Youth, stand up. You don't have to be afraid.
My name is Jesus. I'm undocumented, I'm queer, I'm unashamed, and I'm unafraid.
I want all of us to give our attention to Cristobal. Oh, whoa. Hi everyone, can you all hear me? Yeah. Cool. My name is Cristobal or Chris. I'm originally from Chile. I live in Brooklyn, New York, but I lived in Boston actually down the street for about 11 years. I'm an organizer. I'm part of the core group of the National Immigrant Youth Alliance, as well as a co-founder. And I guess what I'm going to speak about a little bit. Sorry. Hello? Okay. So what I'm going to speak about a little bit is the history of NIYA, of how all this craziness really came about. I got involved in what many people call the migrant rights movement when I was about 14 years old. And I got involved at a time where the conversation was youth were starting to make a come up in our movement and started to dictate a piece of the conversation, which was a conversation that was dominated by immigration reform, and then we came talking about the DREAM Act. Are you all familiar with the DREAM Act? Raise your hand if you don't know what the DREAM Act is. Alright, so we got a hand. So the DREAM Act is a bill that if it were to become a law, it would allow undocumented students access to legalization through education, so through higher education. And with the years, our movement grew, right? And as when things grow, things also change, right? And we hit this point in I want to say 2009, 2010, where our growth was really, really good, but we needed to get a little more gangster with the work. Because at the time, the conversation was highly dominated by immigration reform, which meant talking about relief for our people, for ourselves, for our families, but also it meant national security, it meant militarization, it meant border communities continue to get buried at the bottom of the debate and no one ever paying attention to that. And we started feeling a little antsy about those things. And then an interesting turn of events happened when we were all part of this national group at one point, and we had a convening in Minneapolis. And when everybody was going home, one of our national leaders from Argentina, who was flying with an expired passport but did not realize it, got caught by ICE at the airport. That particular young person had come here under a visa waiver program, which means that he didn't need a visa to come in, but he waived away all his rights. So he didn't have right to a court date. They could just detain him and deport him within 2 or 3 hours. So we freaked out big time. We're like, shit, what are we gonna do here? Because, so we just said, well, we've been kind of working on people's deportations, so let's just throw down and make phone calls, faxes, emails to ICE. And in one day we generated so much pressure that we got Matias released, not deported, though he was still in deportation proceedings. So a group of us at the time who were kind of frustrated with what's going on in the movement, right, realized how much people just rose up when one of our own was detained. I mean, our community is our community. Everyone is one of our own, but sometimes things tend to hit a little closer to home. And in January of 2010, some of us started the discussions about doing things a little bit different. And we started imagining what an undocumented movement could look like if we used civil disobedience tactics and direct action tactics, that though they would put our futures and our lives on the line because we would be risking deportation, it would be a huge slap in the face to the system and a big wake-up call and an invitation to open up a different political space in our movement. So in 2010, a few of us got together and started talking and came up with a little project that was called The Dream is Coming, which is what you see on people's shirt on that video. And we said, well, it's time to change our tactics. It's time to do civil disobedience. We're not going to tell nobody what we're doing. And we're going to call this The Dream is Coming. We're going to build suspense on the media. We put up a website with a little countdown clock that said The Dream is Coming in so many days. And everybody was like, whoa, what is that? What's coming? What's this? And then on, I want to say May 17th, 2010, in Tucson, Arizona, a few weeks after SB 1070 had been passed, 5 undocumented young people staged the first ever civil disobedience action, a sit-in, a takeover of a congressional offices of John McCain. So I had the privilege of being on the field team for that action and help coordinate the organizing. And it was probably one of the most beautiful days that year. They sat in that office for about 7 hours. You can see there Yahaira, Lisbeth, Mohammed, Raul, and Tanya, aka the Dream 5. They sat in there for about 7 hours until the cops finally came, gave them some cookies and some water, and then arrested them. Yeah, I don't know what was that about, but they were trying to show they have a heart. And they took them away, and it all sank in, you know? Like our friends were going purposely into ICE detention as part of challenging the system, right? And we saw that, and we did that, and we had about 100 people, 150 people outside of their office chanting for 7 hours. We were so loud that the immigration court next to the office had to shut down because we disturbed this process that they have called Operation Streamline, which is a thing that they do to deport like 100 people a day in Arizona. So it's like a streamline of folks that are just getting deported on the spot. So we were so loud that we disturbed the whole process. And that became kind of like a big explosion in the movement. And the movement was like, what the hell are these kids doing? Why? Why are you getting arrested? Why are you risking deportation, right? And for us, and our messaging was really, we were like, yo, we're doing this because John McCain has to support the DREAM Act, and if he's so cool, he ain't gonna deport us. But the real reason underneath that, right, not for the media, but for ourselves was, we just need to do something that's gonna make this movement rise, right? We need to do something that's gonna make this movement own its agency. We need to own our stories, our actions, our ability to create change, right? And that was a crazy decision that led to a whole wave of young people, of undocumented young people that were like, yo, we want to get arrested too. And we were like, oh shit, there's like 200 of y'all all over the country. I guess this needs to grow. And that's how The Dream is Coming eventually became the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. And for the past 3 years, we've been using these tactics to really accomplish our goals. So we started with working on deportation cases, stopping deportations. Then we went to sit-ins, and the escalation after that, which Marco will talk about in a few minutes, is we infiltrated a detention center in Florida and one in Michigan. And then in the last few months, we did 2 actions that we also had the privilege to be a part of, Marco as a participant and me as a coordinator, called the Dream 9 and the Dream 30. Have you all heard about this? Yes? Yes. All right, word.
How many of you all have heard it through the ASN? Okay.
Don't be stealing our thunder. So the Dream 9 and the Dream 30 action were actions to challenge the border, to understand that the fight to keep families together does not stop at deportation, to show the system that if they wanted us to come through the front door, then they needed to open the fucking door, and if they weren't willing to do that, then we could tug and pull too, right? So with that, I'll pass it on to Marco. Or actually, we'll have a video first, no?
Yeah, we're going to have a video first of one of the participants in the Dream 9. Her name's Lulu. She's from Chicago. She's from Mexico. You want to show it?
I was just going to give it a context. Oh, go ahead. So, this video was recorded in Mexico City. Lulu Martinez from Chicago, who's a member and organizer with NIYA. For the Dream 9, what happened is that 3 of our organizers self-deported back to Mexico. Them 3 being Lulu, Marco, and Lisbeth, to connect with youth that had been previously deported and then come back and present themselves at the port of entry in Arizona and say, we demand that you let us back into the country. So this is a video shot in Mexico City. after Lulu got a chance to come back home after many, many years. So after this, Margot will take it over. Thank you.
My name is Lulu Martinez, and I'm here in La Ciudad de Mexico. I still can't believe that I'm here. And part of me is really, really happy. I got to see where I was born. I got to see where my dad grew up. I got to see my cousins who are my age. And I'm really excited that we know that we have a lot of support back home in the U.S. Mamá, papá.
Los quiero.
Vamos a regresar. I'm gonna come home. I'm gonna come home.
So Lulu is an organizer with the National Immigrant Alliance out of Chicago, and she's queer. She's an undergraduate now at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and like me, we're both 23 years old, and 20 years ago our families brought us across the border in the same town in Nogales, Arizona. So for us, when we self-deported, we actually went back to the place that we crossed in 20 years ago. We can probably go back to the slideshow yeah, just that. So this PowerPoint is the second act of civil disobedience going backwards to 2010. And Lulu was a participant in that action. And that was again to step up for the pressure for the DREAM Act to pass that year. Which ultimately it failed by a vote, by 5 votes short of the filibuster proof. It got the majority in the Senate, so 55 votes. The Democrats at that point controlled the House. So 5 Democrats in the Senate decided not to vote and support the DREAM Act. And so obviously that accountability continues, and at the same time the reality that each day 1,000 or 1,100 people are deported from the United States. Yeah. Sorry. So, is this better? Good. Yeah, okay, so again, the DREAM Act fails in 2010, back when Lulu is a participant in this action by 5 votes, and we still have to live with the reality that each day 1,100 people are deported, meaning that there's the structure and the money and the detention facilities and the deportation officers to deport one person nearly every minute from the U.S. And that amounts to about 400,000 people every year. So what we've been doing ever since then is what we call YES trainings, Youth Empowerment Summits, where we gather people from around our communities in spaces like this to start building platforms to share our own stories. First, like the youth, creating that space safe enough so that youth are empowered and emboldened enough to finally say, look, I'm undocumented, we've been living in the United States for 10, 12, 20 years without papers and ashamed and in fear, just like me, just like Cristobal, who was at one point undocumented, in fear of deportation every single day, and not just for us, but also for our family members. And through these summits, not only do we tell them how to, not tell them, but kind of show through workshops how to share your own story, but also how one is part of a movement of not just singular individuals, but 11 million people in the United States. 2.1 million of them, which are youth, and 2 million people that have been deported within the last 6 years alone under the Obama administration. And so these are pictures of how Cristobal was sharing different acts of civil disobedience from the top left corner in Arizona to Portland, Oregon, to the bottom left in Alabama, protesting HB 57, which was their copycat Arizona anti-immigration law. And the youth above, the Arizona youth above, actually that was in Maricopa County where Sheriff Joe Arpaio presides, and they were actually challenging also like local authorities, right, to be detained and to be put into his tent city, into his deportation streamlined, which they weren't. Through our actions, have shown that when people come out in public spaces, or even in actions of civil disobediences, when you challenge the system falls apart. The fear that we grew up with for 20 years, the fear that so many people in our communities experience, and in the bottom right in Georgia, it falls, right? Because when we challenge the system, when we have the pressure of the community, of so many people in the press, so many people being targeted like politicians held accountable, the system falls apart, and it's actually not to ICE's benefit to deport us, right? To be put into the system because of the public pressure, the public attention is so bad. So this is what our online pages. This is usually Pinterest, but we use Facebook, Twitter, email, blast, any really outlet, any platform, obviously face-to-face in churches and communities and schools to promote different petitions. And this is specifically from the Florida campaign where we infiltrated the Broward Transitional Center. And you can just see, I mean, these are everyday folks that we had been hearing from this particular county were being stopped for fishing without a license, for being passengers in a vehicle that was stopped, that was maybe profiled on their way to church, on their way to school, dropping off their kids from school, and people, they might not have even been the drivers, but could have just been passengers in there without papers, and they were asked for them from the police, and then turned over to Border Patrol or to Immigration. And so we built about over 100 of these petitions and secured the release of about 4 dozen folks, and are still working with people from this facility. One of the people that I met there, Carlos Palacios, is right now, he was deported and now trying to come back from Honduras, and he's actually in Houston at the Houston Processing Center right now, and he has a live petition that we can share afterward. So this is a little bit about me. This is where I'm from. I'm from San Miguel Aguititlan, where I was born 23 years ago. That's me on the bottom right, and my parents had their marriage 25 years ago. So it's a very traditional village, and again, 20 years ago in 1993, there was the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement that was signed, which structurally destroyed a lot of the traditional grown economic markets that existed in places like San Miguel, and also created this idea of obviously perpetuating the American dream. So in one generation, you just see countless of young folks going to El Norte. Like my parents are 23 years old with 2 young kids and expecting a 3rd one, and so they decided to come to the U.S. in 1992. And at first, they were just going to leave me and my sister behind for a year to save up money and then come back here and come back to their hometown and build a house. But just seeing the opportunities in terms of education and work, they decided to relocate to our home in New York. And this is just like a global snapshot that is about 6 years old from the New York Times, but it just shows kind of the migration pattern, and it's largely from the global south to the global north, but also giving the context that though we talk about it so much, only 3% of people are immigrants. So only 3% of people in the world choose to leave their hometown, their home language, culture, extended families, home religions, to kind of go to a different place. And a lot of displacement occurs, as we see through history, not just willingly, but also forcefully, whether it be free trade agreements that change economic markets, or whether it be war, climate change, famine, hunger. All of these are factors. And this is only the latest wave of migration. Obviously, migration is historical to the human history. And you see that, again, only 3% of people choose to migrate. So 97% of people choose to stay in their hometown. But then looking specifically to undocumented immigrants and how this is a very concrete reality. There's 11 million undocumented people in the United States, and that's about 1/3 of the global population of undocumented people. So there's about 30 million undocumented people around the world, a rough estimate. And so it's a very purposeful reality. I want to say, it's not you don't accidentally get 12 million, 11 billion people living in the shadow in one day, but this happens across decades and because of real policies. This is a little bit about me, the schools that I went to. When we migrated to the U.S., I went to Juan Pablo Duarte, which is it's overwhelmingly Dominican. It's named after the founder of the Dominican Republic in Washington Heights in New York City. Julio Diaz talks about a lot about it in his novels, because it's one of the biggest Dominican communities. Again, because of the Trujillo dictatorship, a lot of folks
left the Dominican Republic in the 1960s. But even so, like a generation later, like I felt like really at odds with my classmates because like I had recently immigrated and they had already been here for at least one generation. And then going to Deerfield, which is just up the road from here, and then Kenyon College. But still feeling very uneasy about who I was until I came out and joined what is the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. This is our 2012 Dream Act graduation. But felt so uncomfortable with myself and almost like I almost forget all those years where I lived in the shadows, not telling anyone about my story except people in my church or in my families. No one else knew who I really was, and no one really knew how I had been so advantaged to get these private scholarships. And I felt myself very uneasy with lying so much to everyone that I knew, not being able to trust people enough to tell them something, maybe like one of the most significant parts of who I am. So fast forwarding it, this is when we were, so being empowered enough not only to tell your story, but then we had developed the capacity after doing multiple acts of civil disobedience to what Cristobal had hinted, actually turning ourselves into a detention center. And this me and Viridiana, after 23 days in detention, when we were at the Broward Transitional Center, and you see the Geo Guard right next to us, but we were basically kicked out of the facility once it went public that we were actually DREAM Act eligible youth that had turned ourselves willingly to this facility in order to record stories of detainees inside and getting them to the outside. And so I had shown in a previous slideshow like the different petitions. So all of those were picked up because we had conversations for about 3 weeks with people, just getting to know them, getting their story, why they were here, why they were removal proceedings. And obviously it's like a very hopeless, almost hopeless space because it's like your last stop before being deported. But at the same time, because we were all in orange jumpsuits, like that gave us a lot of authenticity. And when we're in normal spaces, it's almost sometimes really hard to get to that space where someone trusts you enough to tell their story, right? To say like, look, I'm undocumented and this is what I am, and this is what I'm suffering through. But when we turn ourselves into this facility, knowing that there's 600 people in there that share our same condition, like a lot of those barriers that we're so scared to share day to day become much more easy to overcome. And so that's something counterintuitive that I would have never thought until I found myself in that facility for about 3 weeks. And this is, once we got kicked out, that same weekend we came back, and we didn't come back with ourselves, we came back with all the families of the detainees, as many as we could. On the inside, everyone followed their families and saying, look, we're going to have a mass rally this Sunday. And on the outside, we had been camping out every weekend when you have visitations and saying, look, you have to show up on this particular, it was the first weekend in August of last summer, in 2012. Because 600 immigrant detainees had been on a hunger strike after we got kicked out. Because we had met countless of folks that met those what we were saying were low priority deportations, which is a memorandum that was issued by ICE in 2011 saying that people that really pose no threat to national security shouldn't be deported, shouldn't be a priority for deportation. And we saw countless of folks in there because the Broward Transitional Center is quote-unquote a model facility where people with non-violent offenses get detained and then subsequently deported.
But yeah, so the DREAM Act portal came up, and there were all these people, would share articles about the DREAM Act, about legislators who were coming out in support of the DREAM Act. And it wasn't until then that I got in contact with Mo, actually. He was the first person I talked to when before the mobilization in 2010 in July in DC was happening. And he put me in contact with someone in my state. And that's when we really started sort of getting into, DREAM Act, and obviously like the educational component comes with that because the DREAM Act is geared more towards immigrant students. And so, 2 years of like organizing with undocumented youth down south came and went, and then I was able to come to Hampshire on a scholarship. And when I got here, I actually recently just learned this last Sunday when we were having breakfast that Massachusetts, being the blue state that it is, does not have in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants, which we can do something about that. You know, we're students. Like, don't we want more undocumented students coming to school with us? We need to do something about that. And so I think that, you know, like growing up in the South, and in 2010, the Board of Regents decided to pass this resolution that basically banned all undocumented students from the top 5 universities. But the wording of the ban is not just these 5. The wording of the ban is every educational institution in the state of Georgia that has turned away qualified applicants, meaning anyone who's papers. Because the qualifications is basically lawful status. Any institution that has turned away qualified applicants cannot accept undocumented students anymore. So what this ban was worded to make it spread, to make it not just stay in these 5 colleges and these top 5 universities, but to make it spread to community colleges and to other state schools where, you know, most of the time that's where the very few undocumented students that they get to go to college can go. And so that's something that, you know, like here at the state level, we can do something about that. I don't know if that's what you wanted me to talk about, if there's something more specific you want me to go into.
That's it. Like, I mean, I think in terms of like hearing the like Cristóbal and brother Marco, I think like, I mean, my experience, I'm not undocumented, but I grew up in California with like a mixed status family, and then going as an undergrad. I think one thing we learned immediately was that I think creating those spaces for undocumented people to have power, and then building on a very local level and transforming like the spaces that we locally like navigate first before like moving into something bigger, such as the state dream map or the national dream map, or like getting people out of detention centers. But immediately it was just like finding those immediate spaces to build power. I don't know, like that was just my experience. And for me it's been frustrating to know that, for me when I went into undergrad, there was already a base of undocumented people with a shitload of power. And then coming here and like navigating the institutions and seeing that like white folks are using the way that we're undocumented people instead of undocumented people, like, you know, having that space to organize.
Any, Mika?
I just wanted to share with everyone that I'm from New Jersey, and yesterday was a great day for New Jersey students. The New Jersey Senate Budget Committee basically passed New Jersey tuition equality on the bill, which is S479, and basically what it does is it grants undocumented students the equal access to higher education. So basically they're able to pay the same tuition rate as documented students. So this is just the budget committee. And I was just so happy yesterday because not only is there 40 to 70,000 undocumented students in New Jersey, but these students are my friends, they're my community, they're my family, and this is not just about people immigrated and falling out of status or not having status. This is about people and community and family and the ones that you love. And growing up, right now one of my friends, last year she applied to Brown and they put her on the waiting list, and one of my professors, who's a Brown alumni, called them up and said, oh, why didn't she get accepted? And they said, oh, we wanted to accept her, but we didn't know what was going on with the status. She wants to become a doctor, and she's the most passionate person I know when it comes down to medicine. This girl never sleeps. She's always about chemistry, biology, and all that stuff. And I just wanted to share her story because I want you guys to know that these laws, they're deliberate, these policies are deliberate, and they're affecting the lives of students. And that it's not just enough to talk about it in a framework are doing something wrong. These are deliberate policies. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was a deliberate policy from the U.S. government. And it was not until 1965 that the U.S. government took out a quota from immigration policy. So when we think about undocumented people, when we think about immigrant people, let's not pretend that it's somehow their fault that they're in the situation that they're in. When I came here from Jamaica at 8 years old in 2000, when I fell out of status because my visiting visa expired, let's not pretend that it is a child's fault that at 8.5 years old he is calling her illegal and she's watching us on television. I think that at Hampshire we definitely have to create more safe spaces for people who are undocumented. And one of the things we definitely have to do is bring more undocumented students here. Let's show that Hampshire is really real when it says it's forward thinking and that it really believes that everyone is equal. Let's do that.
Any more questions, comments?
I just wanted to confirm something that I heard earlier. So if you're eligible for the DREAM Act, does that mean that you do have access to insurance and a driver's license for the time you're eligible or not?
Well, like the DREAM Act has been in existence since 2001, and it's never passed. It's always been pretty close to passing. So, so right now there isn't a DREAM Act, but what there is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals that was enacted last summer of 2012. And like the benefits for that vary kind of across states. So there's states where you have access for a driver's license once you have your DACA, because DACA gives you a workout. Wait, what does it give? It gives you
It gives you a non-immigrant status, which you're still undocumented. You still don't have any legal status. Like you said, it's a very ambiguous space. But it gives you like a work permit, and it gives you like the ability to go apply for like a driver or get a driver's license. But some states have come out and said, no, we're not going to give DACA recipients driver's licenses, like Arizona did.
Right. And deferred action essentially just means that the government knows you're undocumented, but they're choosing not to deport you. So they're like, you might as well work while you're here, and it gets renewed every year.
Now, off of that, then, what's the fear of people who are registering for that, and then after the 2 years are up, now that they're in the system, they're no longer, like, now they're like, discovered. So is that like risk that they can get deported now? Or like, what's the contract?
We're undocumented and afraid.
But yeah, I think what like legal experts have kind of this is what I've come across is that like deferred action. I mean, I think temporary protected status (TPS), what like some Central American folks that have suffered like hurricanes and are displaced because of that. It's similar, and so like again, I guess maybe this is too much of a capitalistic analysis, but like once someone gets a work permit and gets more established in the U.S., invests more in the country, like might get like a house or a more steady job or a car, like then they're more of a prized immigrant, right? Because they have more capital, more investment in the country, so it's less desirable for the U.S. to deport them. But I mean that's not entirely the case, like all the time. But I think what legal experts think is that because this is the most desirable group of people, and it's a very like capped amount of people that are even eligible for deferred action. I think only about at max 400,000 people have received it out of 12 million undocumented immigrants. So I think it's like the most elite group that the U.S. like wants to keep in this country. And so like no one talks about what about them?
What about them?
And what about 10.5 million people that can't even apply for deferred action?
Right. And also like every time, at least for within our network, right, and the folks who we're in relationship with, someone engages into a dynamic that could potentially lead to deportation, it always becomes a strategic question, like, is this a risk or is it an opportunity, right? Because we tend to like doing crazy things, right? So like, risks equals opportunity, so.
It's also, it hasn't been like 2 years after DACA. Yeah. So that's also something that I know like when DACA was announced and before it was actually implemented, there was a lot of talk about, well, you know, after the 2 years, everyone who's been registered is going to get deported. But you know, it's like, well, whatever, we'll see. We'll deal with that when the time comes. But for now, yeah, like enough time hasn't gone by also. Like I think that's also a big factor in determining like what about, you know, like what's life after DACA.
My question, I guess, is more for Marco. I'm sort of curious how, if it ever occurred to you that maybe your actions in self-deportation might be more subversive than revolutionary, if that makes sense. Do you ever worry in your acts of civil disobedience or protest that your movement might just be a way of subverting the system as opposed to fixing it? And if you do have those worries, what do you really like feel when addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. I think it does raise like all of these like very critical questions of like what ultimately motivates us. And I mean, Cristobal and I have been in this dialogue for a long time about what are we actually just reacting to a system, or are we actually working to constructively build spaces for undocumented people, build actual community. And on the bus right here, we were talking about how we ourselves, as maybe not as citizens, but definitely as consumers, how and what was read tonight, power the system, pay taxes into the deportation system, into that quota. So like we ourselves hold maybe some of the keys to changing it, to abstaining from this deportation machine. So I think obviously it's multi-layered. So are we just? I mean, I don't know if that's what your question was pointing to. Like, are we just like fighting back, combating like day-to-day immigration policing, or are we actually like building something that points to like an alternative where we have a community that then is organized enough? And I think this goes also back to like the first question about difficulties with other organizations. Is that I think our mentality ourselves too is that. Like on the we don't have to do our work so that the National Immigrant Youth Alliance continues, but actually it should be a hope that eventually like our organization isn't necessary, right? Because if we educate the community enough, then we shouldn't be experts right at what we're doing, but this education should be popularized and diffused in such a way that we cease to be important or relevant. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think they are really important.
Hi, I was wondering if you, Marcos and Cristobal, could speak a little bit more to your experiences, Marcos especially in infiltrating the detention centers, and what you learned through that experience and talking to these people, and that place that's so emblematic of the criminalization of undocumented people.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot. I learned so much, and it's also odd because I think a lot of what I learned in like other institutions, like in boarding school and college, still like applies. Like a lot of the like severe surveillance, but obviously like as opposed to like Kenyon College or Hampshire College, which is like a prized institution that you're here. Obviously, this is like the opposite. These are the institutions that I always was trained to and told to like evade. And to actually confront it, in part, is liberating, but at the same time, you actually see, like how people, like what happens to people right before they're deported, and also like a lot of the nuances to the system. Like in Broward Transitional Center, there's over of the 600 immigrant detainees, well over 100 of them work voluntarily for $1 a day, and without immigrant detainees working there, quote unquote, voluntarily. Like that system, that whole facility wouldn't work and wouldn't be as profitable. And one of the most prized jobs in that facility is actually to work in the intake office, because then you know what is the next batch of deportees, and you can see if you're on that list or one of your friends. But the people there, they feel like maybe they're more closer to like to the authorities, so they're maybe like less at risk. But those folks that work in the intake office are also the ones that knock on your door and saying like, you have to get your bags ready in 3 hours because you're gonna get deported. And so it's really like traumatizing almost to see like your very own like undocumented people like are the ones that like even in that facility work towards deportation. And I mean, I think there's so many other subtleties like how even like the chaplains or the church services inside kind of reinforce, like justify the working of that facility, so that like a lot of the detainees feel like they are at fault for being there, as opposed to like this massive profitation like machine for profit that benefits from us being detained. But also like a lot of like the resistance, a lot of the acts of solidarity among the detainees. While I was there, like one of the breakfast crew staff, like breakfast was served like at 5 a.m. and they have to start working like at 4. Like they organize amongst themselves a worker strike to not go to work, which can be like very severely penalized. Like you can be changed, like shipped to another facility, and like your family might not know of that transfer, but they made that risk in order to like stand up. So I think that, I mean, a lot of highs and lows, and we could talk a lot more about it throughout the night, but I mean those are just a few stories.
I guess for my piece it was like, I think we're really good at being like, at just like collectively accepting the bullshit of the world. And like, you, like for real, like a lot of us watch TV, right? And when you turn on the TV and you turn on the news, you got illegals, you got criminals, you got bums, you got all these negative connotations to who we are. So I think that my learning was not so much about like how messed up the system is, because I knew that firsthand, you know, being part of a country that had a dictatorship, coming up in the hood all the time, being a high school dropout, being undocumented for like 10 years, you know, having my fair share of run-ins with the nation state. And so to me, the learning was about agency. It was about like, holy shit, like I could do something about this. This is about creating opportunities with ourselves and for ourselves. And the learning was really like, what I guess the biggest learning is that all it takes to change something is actually doing it, right? Like, it just takes a group of people who are like, okay, this is crazy, but we're gonna do it because it's gonna change things. So like, I love you, you love me, we accountable, we cool, let's do it, you know? And that's all it takes. Like legit, that's all it takes. So go do some crazy shit.